You know Britain for its rolling countryside, its ancient castles, its proud industrial cities. You know it for Buckingham Palace, the Premier League, a country that once ruled a quarter of the world and still carries itself like it remembers. But there's another Britain, one that doesn't make the tourism reels, one that doesn't appear in the growth statistics or the estate agents' brochures, scattered across forgotten coastlines, buried in post-industrial valleys and rotting quietly on the edges of wealthy cities. There are communities that have been left behind so completely, so deliberately, that the people living in them have started doing the only thing left available to them: leaving. These are 12 places in the UK that people are desperately escaping. Stay until the end, because our number one entry sits at the centre of a government failure so documented, so undeniable, that the people responsible have still never faced a single criminal charge. Hit subscribe. Let's begin. Number 12. Jaywick, Essex. On the Essex coast, just past the faded resort of Clacton-on-Sea, sits a cluster of tiny wooden chalets pressed against the North Sea. From a distance, they look almost quaint. Get closer and the picture changes entirely. This is Jaywick Sands. For several consecutive years, it has held a record no community wants, officially the most deprived neighbourhood in England. Jaywick was never built to be lived in. In the 1930s, a developer sold tiny plots as weekend chalet retreats for working-class Londoners. No drainage planned, no proper roads, no running water, just cheap timber and the promise of sea air on a Saturday. Families loved it, children played on the beach. It was affordable, honest joy at a time when working-class Britain had precious little of it. Then package holidays to Spain drained England's seaside trade. Jaywick's economy collapsed. The chalets, now the cheapest housing available anywhere in the region, began attracting people with nowhere else to go. The temporary became permanent. The holiday became a trap. Infrastructure was never upgraded. Roads remained legally unadopted, meaning the council had no obligation to maintain them. Flooding became a recurring crisis. The chalets, built for summer weekends, began rotting under year-round occupation. Today, Jaywick has some of the highest rates of unemployment, poor health and child poverty in England. The seawall is considered inadequate. Climate projections suggest parts of it could be permanently underwater within decades. And yet, residents organise food banks, beach cleanups, community projects. People who have lived here 40 years look at the sea every morning and call it home, because for many of them, it is the only home they have ever known. Number 11. Port Talbot, Wales. Driving into Port Talbot from the M4, the first thing you see are the towers of the steelworks, breathing fire and orange smoke into the Welsh sky. An almost cinematic sight. Industrial cathedrals on the coastline. Or at least they were. The furnaces are going cold. Steel has been made here for generations. The Tata steel plant employed fathers, sons, grandsons. The town didn't just depend on steel economically, it understood itself through steel. Its pubs, its rugby club, its self-image, all of it orbited the works. At its height, over 18,000 people worked in Port Talbot's steel industry. In 2024, Tata announced the closure of the blast furnaces. Nearly 3,000 direct jobs gone overnight. Promises of transition funding and retraining programs arrived quickly. Residents had heard versions of these promises before. They knew how these stories tended to end. But here's what the headlines missed. Port Talbot has had some of the worst air quality in Wales for decades. Particulates from the steelworks have contributed to respiratory illness across generations. A background cost of having work that residents simply absorbed as normal. Now the plant is closing. The air might eventually get cleaner. The jobs are already gone. Port Talbot sits with an impossible question that no politician has had the honesty to answer. Was this community sacrificed for global economics? Or might it breathe easier because of it? The answer is probably both. And that is a very uncomfortable thing to sit with. Number 10. Middlesbrough, North Yorkshire. There's a moment driving through central Middlesbrough where you realise something that takes a second to process. The boarded-up windows aren't an exception. They're the rule. And yet this town was once extraordinary. Purpose-built for industry in the 1830s, Middlesbrough's iron and steel helped construct the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Its transporter bridge, still standing, one of only a handful left in the world, announced this town's ambitions to anyone paying attention. By 1900, its population had exploded from 40 people to over 90,000, one of the fastest-growing towns in Victorian Britain. Then, deindustrialisation arrived through the 1970s, 80s and 90s. The steel industry closed. The chemical plants left behind contaminated land. Too expensive to clean, too toxic to build on, too politically inconvenient to address. Unemployment became generational. Today, Middlesbrough consistently ranks among the most deprived local authorities in England across almost every measure. But here's what the statistics miss. A stubborn creative energy has been quietly building, a growing university, an arts scene that punches above its weight, young people choosing to stay and build something in a place everyone else has written off. It hasn't turned the tide yet. But in a town counted out as many times as Middlesbrough, that stubbornness means something. Number 9. Hull, East Yorkshire. Hull sits at the edge of England, pressed against the Humber estuary like it's been pushed to the corner of the map and told to stay there. You don't pass through Hull, you go there because you're going to Hull. For most of its history, that isolation didn't matter, because Hull had the sea. Its deep-sea trawler fleet was one of the most significant in the world. The men who worked it headed north into Arctic waters for weeks at a time. Brutal, dangerous, essential. The fish quays thundered. Processing plants employed thousands. Entire communities organized themselves around the rhythms of the trawlermen. Then came the Cod Wars. 3 disputes with Iceland, concluding in 1976, excluded British trawlers from Icelandic waters. The deep-sea fishing industry collapsed almost overnight. Nobody replaced it. Nobody was ever really asked. Population began its slow decline. In 2017, Hull was named UK City of Culture, a genuine moment of pride. The cameras came. The coverage was generous. Then the cameras left. Residents will tell you the structural investment promised never fully materialised. The spotlight moved to the next designated city. Hull remained, celebrated for a year, underserved for the decade that followed. Number 8. Sandwell, West Midlands. Most people in England couldn't point to Sandwell on a map, which is precisely the problem. Created in 1974 by local government reorganisation, Sandwell stitched together 6 separate towns: West Bromwich, Oldbury, Smethwick, Rowley Regis, Tipton, Wednesbury, under a single name that none of them had chosen and none of them wanted. Each town had its own industrial story: glass, springs, metal goods, chain-making. The Black Country earned its name from the soot and fire of 19th century industry, a badge of honour worn by communities who knew exactly what they built and why it mattered. The industry left. And what remained was a borough with no shared identity, no clear centre, no single story to tell governments or investors. Funding fell through the administrative cracks between 6 towns. Political attention drifted toward larger, more legible cities nearby. Sandwell now ranks near the bottom of national deprivation indices in almost every category. And yet the communities here are some of the most tightly bonded in Britain. People from Tipton will tell you they're from Tipton, not Sandwell, never Sandwell. The local identity that bureaucracy tried to erase simply went underground and kept burning. If you've been to any place on today's list, drop your story in the comments, and a thumbs up helps us keep making videos like this one. Number 7. Clacton-on-Sea, Essex. Clacton has the pier. The promenade, the candy-coloured beach huts. From a distance it looks exactly like the postcard version of an English seaside town. Walk closer. The postcard is torn at the edges. One of England's oldest purpose-built seaside resorts, Clacton's Pier opened in 1871. Victorian holiday trains from Liverpool Street arrived packed with working-class London families. Amusements, illuminations, the sound of a resort doing exactly what it was supposed to do, giving ordinary people the extraordinary luxury of rest. Butlins opened nearby. The beach was full every summer. Then cheap flights to Spain rewrote everything. The holiday trade evaporated. Hotels became bedsits. Guest houses became emergency accommodation. The town's cheap housing began attracting vulnerable people placed by councils from across the southeast who needed somewhere affordable to house those with nowhere else to go. Clacton is now one of the oldest and most economically fragile communities in England. Its population skews dramatically elderly. The young leave for opportunities elsewhere. The services that might attract them back are being cut year on year. A slow, quiet crisis unfolding on a British beach. Almost nobody is watching. Number 6. Burnley, Lancashire. Burnley gets mentioned in national political debates constantly and listened to almost never. It appears in think tank reports as a data point. It surfaces in newspaper columns as a symbol. The actual town tends to get lost somewhere between the statistics and the opinions, which is a shame, because Burnley's history is genuinely remarkable. At its industrial peak, Burnley was the cotton weaving capital of the world. Not of Lancashire, of the world. Its mills produced more cotton cloth per capita than anywhere else on Earth. The noise in the weaving sheds was so deafening that workers developed their own lip-reading language to communicate, and yet the community built around those mills was cohesive, proud, alive. Working men's clubs, chapels, a football club that won the First Division. The mills closed through the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Nothing replaced the work at the scale required. In 2001, civil unrest between communities made national headlines, driven by segregation, economic frustration, and years of neglect. Politicians arrived to discuss community cohesion. The cameras left. The underlying conditions didn't fundamentally change. Today, terraced houses in Burnley sell for under £30,000. Streets of Victorian housing half empty, their value so low that no private developer sees profit in renovating them and no public body has the budget to do it. A town suspended between a past too present to ignore and a future not yet visible. Number 5. Margate, Kent. Margate was dying. Then someone built a world-class art gallery on its seafront and declared it saved. Walk 3 streets back from the Turner Contemporary on a Tuesday afternoon and you'll understand why long-term residents smiled quietly at that announcement. Turner himself painted Margate's light, a luminous salt haze glow he said he found nowhere else. Dreamland Amusement Park opened in 1920 and became one of the most beloved entertainment venues in the country. Tens of thousands arrived by train from London every summer, filling the town with the particular joy of people given permission to rest. Then the package holiday hollowed it out. By the early 2000s, Margate was routinely listed among the most deprived seaside communities in England. Dreamland closed. Hotels became hostels. The Turner Contemporary opened in 2011. It brought artists, weekenders, boutique hotels, independent coffee shops, a wave of creative professionals who discovered Margate's property prices made a different kind of life possible. The regeneration was real. The coverage was glowing. What the coverage missed was what happened to the people already there. Long-term residents who had weathered the decline found themselves in a neighbourhood whose costs were rising faster than their incomes. The revival priced people out of the revival. Margate's salvation had its own casualties, and the question of who regeneration is actually for remains, here as everywhere, unanswered. Number 4. Corby, Northamptonshire. Corby is a strange town. It sits in the middle of the English Midlands, landlocked, unremarkable geography, surrounded by the kind of countryside that appears on biscuit tins. Walk into a pub and you'll hear something unexpected, Scottish accents, everywhere. In the 1930s, the expanding Corby steelworks needed workers the local area couldn't supply. Recruiters went north, to Lanarkshire, to Glasgow, and thousands of Scottish families followed the work south. They brought their accents, their culture, their chip shops. Corby was designated a new town built entirely around steel. At its peak, the works employed 12,000 people. In 1980, British Steel closed the Corby works. Unemployment hit 30% almost overnight. The community built entirely around a single industry found itself with no industry, inadequate transition support, and a geography that didn't make alternative employment easy to reach. But here's what makes Corby unlike any other town on this list. Families began noticing that children born in the town were experiencing limb abnormalities at rates significantly above the national average. Research pointed toward contaminated land left by the steelworks, industrial waste inadequately managed during demolition and remediation in the 1980s and 90s. The families sued. After years of legal proceedings, the case was settled. The council did not admit liability. The full truth, to the satisfaction of the families involved, has never been publicly established. Corby is the only town in Britain where residents successfully pursued a legal case of this nature against their own local authority. That fact is not widely known. It should be. Number 3. Morecambe, Lancashire. On a clear day, standing on Morecambe's promenade, the Lake District mountains rise across the bay in one of the most quietly spectacular views in England. The view hasn't changed, everything around it has. In its Edwardian heyday, Morecambe was a powerhouse resort. Its Midland Hotel, a curved Art Deco masterpiece opened in 1933, welcomed some of Britain's most prominent visitors. Eric Morecambe took his stage name from this town. The illuminations rivaled Blackpool's. Then the same tide that went out on every English seaside resort went out on Morecambe. Package holidays, economic decline, the concentration of poverty that follows when cheap housing becomes a place's primary economic asset. The Midland Hotel rotted for decades before being eventually restored in 2008. Then came the announcement of Eden Project North, a major waterfront attraction modelled on Cornwall's Eden project designed to transform Morecambe's tourism economy. The plans were beautiful, the renderings were shared. Politicians posed for photographs, the funding was cut, the project stalled. Its future remains deeply uncertain. Morecambe keeps being promised its future, it keeps waiting, and the mountains across the bay keep looking just as beautiful as they always did, completely indifferent to what's happening on the shore. Number 2. Blaenau Festiniog, Gwynedd, Wales. Surrounded on every side by the grey peaks of Snowdonia, Blaenau Festiniog looks like it was placed in the mountains by some industrial force that needed somewhere to put it. The slate waste tips rise above the town like frozen grey waves. Nothing grows on them. Nothing will for centuries. This town roofed the world. Welsh slate from these mountains covered Victorian Britain, industrial Europe, cities built during the Great Expansion of the 19th century. The quarrymen who carved into these peaks worked in conditions of extraordinary hardship, at elevations that made the labour brutal in any weather and life-threatening in winter. The town that grew around them was profoundly Welsh, the language of the quarry, the chapel, the home, male voice choirs, nonconformist faith, a culture dense with identity built around shared hard work in hard country. Cheaper imports ended it, the quarries contracted. Population has been falling for over 100 years without stopping. Blaenau Festiniog holds a particular distinction. It is the only town in the Snowdonia region that sits outside the national park boundary. Locals have argued for decades this exclusion was deliberate, keeping the town outside the tourism investment framework that national park status brings, effectively consigning it to managed decline while the mountains around it were protected and promoted. The twist, and this town deserves one, is that the caverns carved into the mountain over centuries of quarrying have become zip-whirled and bounce below, drawing adventure tourists from across Europe into the very wounds the industry left behind. Tourism is arriving, but the Welsh-speaking community asks a quiet, serious question. Can a place be economically saved while its language and culture are gradually replaced by what visitors want it to be? Let us know what you think in the comments, and stay with us, because number 1 is unlike anything else on this list. Number 1. North Kensington, London. This entry is different. It isn't a forgotten seaside resort or a post-industrial northern town. It sits inside one of the wealthiest royal boroughs in the world's most prominent city, surrounded by some of the most expensive real estate on earth, which is precisely what makes it the most disturbing place on this list. North Kensington has been a working-class community pressed against the edges of extreme wealth for generations. The Notting Hill Carnival was born here, a celebration of Caribbean culture and community, of resistance and joy that grew into one of the largest street festivals in the world. Grenfell Tower stood at its northern edge, a 24-storey residential block, home to 600 people. In 2014 and 2015, the tower was refurbished. New cladding was applied to its exterior. The cladding chosen was cheaper than the fire-resistant alternative, a saving of approximately £2 per square metre. Residents, organised through the Grenfell Action Group, raised formal concerns about fire safety. They documented them, they published them publicly, they warned in writing that it would take a catastrophic event before the authorities would listen. On the 14th of June 2017, a fire started in a 4th-floor flat. 72 people died, men, women, children, people told to stay in their flats. Standard advice designed for buildings with proper fire compartmentalisation stayed. The cladding, chosen to make the building look better from the outside, accelerated the fire up the tower in minutes. The public inquiry ran for years. Its final report concluded the deaths were avoidable. It found failures by the local council, the tenant management organisation, central government's building regulations regime, and the contractors involved in the refurbishment. It found that residents' concerns had not been adequately addressed. More than 7 years later, no individual or organisation has faced a criminal charge. The wrapped tower still stands. The community around it is still there, still fighting every single day for accountability. Survivors describe the hardest part not as the grief, though the grief is immense, but as watching the city carry on around them. The tube running, the restaurants filling, the property market rising, the borough continuing as if 72 people had not died in a building whose dangerous condition had been flagged in writing by the people living inside it. This is not a place people escape from. It's a place the system escaped from. leaving its community behind with unanswered questions that this country has not yet found the courage to properly address. These aren't just struggling places, they are the other side of the same country that gets photographed and celebrated and exported to the world. Every place on this list had a moment of genuine pride, of purpose, of life built by people who worked hard and asked for very little in return. Some were abandoned by economics, some by politics, some by decisions made in rooms where nobody from these communities was ever invited to sit. Britain is very good at its image. It is considerably less comfortable with the question of what it owes to the people it has left behind. Which place surprised you most? Which one made you angry? Tell us in the comments, because the people in these communities deserve to have their stories heard by more than politicians and think tanks. Subscribe if you want us to keep telling them.